For the defense.
First, I want to thank everyone for their attention. I know this case was difficult to endure. You had to see things that you would have never wanted to see. And I started this case, if you recall, very beginning, telling you that Stephen Wiggins killed Sergeant Baker without excuse. And that's true. And you've had to sit and review the evidence and see the video, see those things. And what you've seen is exactly what I told you. And I hope it's been clear that through this, it's never been the position of the defense that that didn't happen. It happened. It was horrible. You had to see Miss Lisa Baker get on this witness stand and talk about that. You had to see a video of Sergeant Baker early in the case, opening up a Christmas present. And then hear Miss Baker as she sat on the stand talking about the loss that she is enduring and will endure, and that Meredith is enduring. And it's real. And there's no getting around it. And it's awful. But as we talked about in jury selection, and like I told you in my opening, remember I said, you're going to see this evidence and it's going to make you angry. And I bet it did. And I told you it made me angry. And if you recall, I said it wasn't until I found out more about Stephen and his life history that I was even able to begin to contemplate or to fathom how something like this could happen. So it was my intention to show you through these last few days what I saw, to help you consider more than just that moment. And that's what the state's really asking you to do. They're asking you to judge somebody based on a snapshot in their life. That's what they're asking. And like we talked about in jury selection, you can't do that. You've got to be able, and you agreed to consider all of those other factors, to go beyond the crime itself, to look at that historical information, because quite frankly, it's hard to understand how that little boy we put on that screen that was Stephen Wiggins, little Stephen, ends up in that chair. How does that happen? Well, what we've seen how it happens. You've seen how it happens. The truth of the matter is, that man never had a chance. Doesn't excuse what he did. Doesn't mean he didn't do it. But when you look outside the moment and see what got him to that day, you see a little boy, a little baby, that was beaten before he ever took his first breath in his mother's stomach. He comes into this world with a damaged brain. That's undisputed. That is undisputed in the proof that Mr. Wiggins has brain damage and has from a congenital defect. And was he thrown into an environment where he had love and support and was nurtured? No. From the minute he entered this world, he entered a world full of terror. And it didn't just start then. It was generational terror handed down, a legacy of terror from the Wiggins side of the family that Scott Wiggins, as you heard, had inflicted upon numerous individuals. It wasn't just Stephen. It was Scotty. And you saw Scotty on this witness stand. You remember the testimony of Charlie Webb. And he was describing being around these kids when they were little. And you remember what he said. He said, and it was so poignant. And I don't know that he intended it to be. And he just had a really good way of putting things, And he said, as it related to Scotty, he said, that boy just withdrew into himself. And what'd you see? Scotty, he struggled to even be in this room. Can you imagine that? He struggled it took him time to even be able to formulate responses. But he came for his brother. He loves his brother. It was real. Scott Wiggins damaged both of his children in a way that they were never right again. But there's one difference between Scotty Wiggins and Stephen. And that is that Scotty at least had the benefit of not having the brain damage that Stephen had. There's no doubt, there shouldn't be any doubt about what these children endured in that home. And it wasn't occasionally, it wasn't a couple of times, it was daily. To the point where they were scared to cry. And you heard the expert testimony. Again, the unrebutted, uncontradicted testimony. You saw the pictures of Stephen's brain. You heard the experts describe how that would affect him in his ability, in his behaviors. You heard testimony from childhood acquaintances. They weren't friends, one of them was, who talked about a little boy who sat in class and made noises and kept his head down and was disruptive, not being mean, not intentionally, not maliciously. And was he given support by the teachers? According to that witness, no, he wasn't. They didn't understand how to help him. And God bless Juanita Wiggins. That poor woman. I mean, just beat down, terrorized. Can you imagine being the mother of the child where your husband and the father of that child is shooting at you as you run away from the house with the baby in your hand? It's unthinkable. It's unimaginable, but it happened. It's real. And you heard scientific, concrete evidence from these experts, from Dr. Agarkar, talking about how that would affect someone with Stephen's brain if they are then subject to such abuse. Now, the state put on an expert, and Dr. Shack, and I'm sure he's a well-intentioned fellow. But you know, shooting from the hip, assumptions, that doesn't cut it. Telling a story about this fella you once knew who had a kid who this happened to one time, who he has to admit, that is not scientific evidence. What did he say? Sometimes children can be resilient. And there was this one other case, and I'll tell you, his antique research from 1975, as if that scientific community hasn't continued to advance since then. There was a fella who had his brain sliced or something like that and still functioned. No one's saying that Stephen Wiggins is incapable of functioning. But what did Dr. Shack have to admit? This one study he relied upon, did it account for children who had brain damage and then were abused, brutally abused on top of that? It didn't. Did it account for how severe the abuse was? It didn't. But you think about the environment. Think about what that does. No positive support. No one leading you. No male role model showing you how to be, what to be in a right way. The influence you have from that father, from the minute you can conceive of him, is anger. It's brutality. It's psychological games that end with you getting hurt where you can't even cry when he stripes you with the belt. And young Stephen Wiggins at that point, he's not able to even tackle that healthy brain. And we know from Dr. Bigler that abuse, even witnessing abuse for a child, affects how the brain functions, how the brain is formed. But you heard Dr. Agarkar talk about what happens if you've got that damage. If you have brain damage and then you are subjected to severe abuse continually for years. What did he say? 1 + 1 = 3. It layers. It layers. Talks about negative outcomes. You heard about ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. Remember what Dr. Agarkar was talking about, how Stephen, according to his meeting with Stephen, had 9 of 10 that could put you and lead you to negative outcomes. And what you say, well, what's a negative outcome? This is a negative outcome. If I've ever seen one. Drug abuse, methamphetamine abuse, negative outcomes. This didn't just start sometime around this case or with methamphetamine abuse. As the experts talked about from Stephen's social history, it is clear that he was impaired as a child. He had cognitive abnormalities as a child. You heard the term maladaptive. He was maladaptive. Wasn't bathing. Had trouble socializing. No one's telling you these things. I'm not here to tell you these things to get you to forgive Stephen Wiggins. You couldn't. You wouldn't. And I'm not asking you to. That would be a bridge too far. What I'm asking you to do, what he said he was willing to do, what you saw in the proof, is put him in a box for the rest of his life. By virtue of your verdict that you've already rendered, one thing is certain. Stephen Wiggins will walk into a TDOC facility, the Tennessee Department of Corrections. He will leave in a casket. He'll leave in a casket. He will spend the rest of his days surrounded by cold steel and concrete, away from any warm embrace of his family and friends. And that's a serious punishment. That's a serious punishment. You've heard testimony about Stephen. He's now medicated. He's had no issues in jail related to being violent with anyone. He got a tattoo. Talk about impulsive, poor judgment, right? Prison tattoo. But you know, what you did see on that screen and what you heard from this witness stand was he's got people that love him. And you don't have to do this. You don't have to allow him to live for him. If you can't find it in your heart, in your individual moral judgment to do it for him, you can do it for some other people. You can do it for Spencer Wiggins, who loves his daddy. Can you imagine to be in that situation? For him to be without his daddy, to not even be able to talk to him on the phone. And look, no one's telling you or trying to minimize Lisa Baker's loss and Sergeant Baker's parents and their loss and Meredith's loss. Their loss was taken because of Stephen's actions. Y'all are not him. The decision you make today is like a stone thrown in the pond. And a death sentence is going to have a ripple effect that's going to affect more than just the punishment of him. Collateral damage. His son wasn't there that day. His son didn't have nothing to do with this. And the fact of the matter is, you can serve a serious punishment on him to make sure he, again, never leaves prison again without hurting Spencer Wiggins. You can do that. You have the power. The effect it would have on his mother, who loves him. His aunt, who helped raise him, who talked about this little boy that she grew up as, herself as a child at 16 years old, with him as a little baby sleeping on her chest. As you go back there and deliberate, you can be better. You can consider the things that he didn't. can do that. Because that we talked about in jury selection, each and every one of you has the right to vote your independent moral judgment. And no one can take it away from you. No one. Not the court, not me, not General Crouch, not another juror. And unless there's 12 of you that vote for a death sentence, it's not death. And you're never required to explain yourself, and you can stick to that independent moral judgment. Remember, we talked a little bit in jury selection about people being respectful of one another in the jury room and being able to share ideas and talk about things, and that nobody ever had a right to bully anybody. And wherever your that judgment is right now, that's something that's in you, and no one can take it away from you. And you've heard this mitigating evidence, all these things we've been talking about. You know, where does that come from? Where does the power to do that come from in y'all? You know, it comes from a place in your heart. That same place where you have the concepts of mercy and grace. And when you're back there and you're thinking and talking about these things, you can look to evidence in this sentencing hearing and the mitigating evidence, and you can say that all of that outweighs these aggravators. It's a life verdict for me. It's a life without parole verdict for me. But it's not even that. It's not a mathematical equation either, like we talked about in jury selection. You could give the weight, the power of life, to a single mitigator that meant something to you. A single thing that you heard from Juanita Wiggins or one of the experts, Aunt Julie or Scotty, Charlie Webb, the classmates, any of those. You can give any one of those, no matter the aggravators, you can give any one of those the power of life. The fact of the matter is, he's in this chair for something he did. But you know, some of those things weren't choices he got to make. Some of those reasons. How he came into this world, he didn't get to choose. Who raised him, he didn't get to choose. And those early things, he made choices, no doubt, but those early things for Stephen Wiggins affected those choices. It affected his ability to make the right choices. You heard the experts talk about poor judgment, impulsivity. Absolutely. Y'all have been so attentive, and this has been such a long journey. And I'm standing here today with one purpose, and it's the same purpose I started this case with. And you remember, in jury selection, when we did it as a group, I stood up and I looked you fine people in the eyes and I said, I am here to plead for the life of Stephen Wiggins. And that's what I'm here for. That's it. It's not to excuse him. It's not to forgive him. It's for one purpose. It's to give the power of life to him, even though he didn't give it to someone else. And each one of you has the power to do that. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your attention and how much of a privilege it's been to present this case to you. Thank you.